Say hello and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. I want to start by thanking Stinson Strout for his support of the lecture series this summer and Purpose One for their sponsorship this year. Now, real quick for anybody who's not familiar with our school, we're a 7-week summer residential intensive program for college through graduate level students. You know, they compete to get in really from all over the world. We have students from as close as York County right here, I think Shrewsbury, to as far away as Perth, Australia, and Vietnam this year. The school's reach is pretty incredible. And the school's all about connecting with nature and being outside and learning about the nature of seeing. We have about 15 instructors and critics that come through each summer for a real pressure cooker kind of experience that allows, I think, our students to run up that hill with a kind of acceleration that's very rare in higher education today. A good friend of the school passed away this week, John David Whistler, one of 3 founders, myself, Ruth Bernard, and JD, all signed the little state documents where it said founders. So he's been a part of the school since its inception and served on the board. Without going too far into it, I mean, I think about the connections he's made for the school and what he's been responsible for in terms of fundraising. There's no bigger person. I think I had it tallied last year for his lecture, but it's $700,000 or $800,000 worth of our funding just through his efforts in 13 years. So I just want to, for a good friend, a moment of silence for John David Whistler. Thank you. Thank you. Lou, I know, is also a close friend of JD's. I'm going to jump to introduce, and she has some things to say too. I want to say some nice things about Lou. The first Mount Gretna person I was ever introduced to, lived in camp meeting for a couple decades, I think. So that's some cred. The person that really introduced me to people around here that opened the doors from there. Great painter who understood right away what the school was trying to do and saw its importance, I think, also as a art professor that works with similarly aged students. I'm just really excited that you're here tonight. I mentioned that she lived in camp meeting, but currently lives in Lititz, Pennsylvania. She studied at UMass Dartmouth, Farmington State University for her BA, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and received her MFA from SUNY Albany in 1991. In the 80s, with a fellowship from the Massachusetts Artists Foundation, she traveled to Nova Scotia, which has been a recurring destination for her to live and paint every year since. In the 90s, she moved to Pennsylvania for a tenured position at Elizabethtown College, where she taught painting and drawing for 20 years. Dedicated to landscape painting, Lou has also been involved with art and healthcare and was recently featured in a Forbes magazine article on art and wellness. She has completed many large-scale commissions for medical centers in the region. Her work is collected across the country. She's represented by the Willard Gallery in South Portland, Maine, Blueprint Gallery, Dallas, and Warm Springs Gallery, Virginia. When she's not painting, Lou works with native plants and has created a habitat and pocket forest in her backyard. Is that true?
Yes.
A pocket forest? Okay. She's been on the board of Mount Gretna School of Art on and off since inception and is currently serving as our secretary. Her recent exhibitions and activity include recently in the spring of 2025, housing, Pennsylvania Dwellings Observed, a solo exhibit at the Susquehanna Art Museum in Harrisburg, which I heard from a lot of people that got to see that. Kiesendal and Calhoun at the Lodge at Woodlock Holly PEA showed with Peter Heller.
He's actually a famous economist.
He's actually a famous economist. fall of 2024, she had a show called Poetic Transformations, Lou Schellenberg and Jean Shaw, Cerulean Arts in Philadelphia, watercolor and plein air workshops at Cerulean in the fall of 2024 and spring of 2025, Cerulean's in Philadelphia. And the spring of 2024, a solo exhibit called Backyards, Hidden Spaces at Lancaster Galleries. And welcome Lou Schellenberg, everybody.
Thank you, Jay. This school is beyond words. It's the most amazing painting and drawing experience for young people that I've ever known. And a lot of it comes down to the person, the people involved, and Jay is a genius. I'm going to jump in and try not to ramble too much. I'm going to go in reverse chronological order. I'm pretty old. I've been doing art my whole life. I grew up in New York looking at art, and there was never anything else. So I've been through a lot of iterations, lived in different places, studied with different people. So I'm going to go backwards because I didn't actually start doing plein air landscape painting until the late 90s, 2000s, which sounds like a long time ago, but being my age, it's kind of recent. So I'm going to start with this spring with this exhibit in Harrisburg. As Jay mentioned, it was called Housing Pennsylvania Observed. There's a really sweet museum, the Susquehanna Art Museum in Harrisburg, and they have different spaces. And I had this body of work that was from the past 5 to 10 years that included architecture, but not just architecture. I realized it was different places where people live all around central Pennsylvania, where I had been out painting, doing plein air painting. So I had the work. I didn't paint the work for the show, and but it was really nice. The museum gave me this exhibit, and they're mostly small. There were only 12 pieces, and they were all small plein air, except for one that I'll show you. And this one actually wasn't in it, but the previous, or the next one I'll show you is from the same location. So this is a manufactured home park near where I live now, down in Lidditz. And, you know, I was just really, I started to get intrigued with different types of clustered communities and neighborhoods. For a long time in my past, I was painting like an isolated home. They were never like portraits of homes. They were more like little, I guess, little still lives in the landscape. So this is like an over 55 manufactured home community. And there's actually big box stores in the distance. And I just got into this whole idea of how idyllic the space was. You know, it didn't matter where people were living. It was just this, you know, really close knit, because I walked around it, I talked to people, really close knit community. And I liked the colorful shapes. And so a lot of my work is pretty graphic and leans towards, as you'll see, a lot of edges, a lot of hard edges. And of course, you know, this is a lot of invention with color. But this one was one of the slightly larger ones in the museum show. It's 19 by 31. That's kind of the outer limit of what I do outside on an easel. And I did it over 2 sessions. And this spot I had gone to many times and sketched and done watercolor. So I knew what I wanted to do by the time I decided to do this painting. And I did a fairly detailed underpainting, which I didn't take a photograph of. But I have a photograph of a different, same process. I just wanted to show how I sometimes start these oils. Sometimes they're very rationally started, very methodical. Not always. This is just one way I work. So the underpainting for the previous one would have been done like this, a fairly, to me, a fairly detailed painting, drawing with the brush. I like to draw with wet media. Now this is 30 by 30. So that was also pretty large for working outside. So that would be over several sessions. This painting, it didn't follow this. I mean, it followed this and then, it ended up in the studio over years and got reworked and reworked. And I don't have a slide of it here, sorry. This was also in the show at the Susquehanna Art Museum. This is a favorite town of mine on the river, on the Susquehanna River, Marietta. And this was done, I think, in 2023. And I'm very critical of my work. I mean, I'm very critical of my work. A lot of stuff ends up in a big pile of rejects, and then some of them survive and get reworked. But this painting I liked, and I think I liked the whole experience. And a lot of the paintings I like, it seems like the day really matters and who I talk to. If I've made some connection with the owner, I'm across the street from this person's yard. A lot of what I do is peer into people's private yards. And this woman came out and she started puttering, and that happens a lot. And I don't know if it's often a coincidence or if it's sort of like territorial, So I went over and talked to her and everything was fine. The only time something has happened when I'm looking into someone's space, hardly anything negative has happened. Once someone called the police, they were far away. That's a long story. I'll tell it later. But anyway, I love, I mean, you can see I love edges, angles, shapes, shadow shapes. And I was at this point trying to incorporate more trees. It's 14 by 18. I didn't put the size on most of the slides, and you can pretty much assume they're mostly small plein air paintings. This is the same town. This was very recent from May in Marietta. It's a river town. And there was actually an event in May that was a month long. And my friends here who are in the audience organized it. And I don't normally do like plein air events where you go and you travel because it's too pressured. You're expected to paint like at a new spot really quickly. I like to know where I'm going and be very familiar with it. And this was a month long, so that was great. And ironically, this is behind a cafe looking towards the river. The ridge in the distance is actually on the other side of the Susquehanna, kind of where Rob Evans lives. And I'm looking down off of this deck of this cafe, but I had a photo of this location on my phone from years before, like maybe 4 or 5 years before. And I use my phone that way to record and remember where to go. So it was nice to be able to return here and do these paintings. It's 16 inches, the square one, on a panel. And the other one is 12 by 16. I just want to mention, I like to work on different surfaces. I mix it up. It really keeps me, it just keeps things fresh. Like I'll just keep panels in my car. I'll keep like a roll of linen. I've started working on paper. These were one session paintings. I don't know if I did them on the same day or not. So I've been fascinated with architecture since I was a kid. I never had an interest in becoming an architect at all. It never occurred to me. But I just realized this in the past few years that as a teenager, I actually had started a collection of architecture books, all kinds of books about, books about trim, about New England architecture, anything to do with architecture. But I hadn't painted architecture until like the last, like I say, since the late 90s or 2000s. And so there's something about it that fascinates my brain. So it's not just the shapes and the edges and the combination of, how things are constructed on the rectangle. Obviously, I love verticals and horizontals. I love this whole idea of how people create borders and divide their outside space and their inside space versus their outside space. I wanted to show something that's a studio painting kind of early on. So this is not the same town. It was done quite a few years ago, and it's based on the plein air one on the right, which is 12 inches. And this is, I think, 30 or 32 inches square. It's actually up in a medical center up here, up the road in Lebanon. There's a Penn Medicine is everywhere. So it's you can walk in the lobby and see it. So the work in the studio gets a little tighter. I fight against that, but it just does. But it's based on many studies. I can't just paint in the studio. I start to feel kind of yucky. So I have to go outside and look, and especially everything about being outside is so much more important, the colors especially. This is another studio painting. I couldn't set up at this spot. So, and this was in the museum show. It's 30 by 40. And again, I'm looking down into this neighborhood and interested in the flattening and the climbing perspective, but also realizing that people have contained these spaces and how they're dividing their space from their neighbor. All that stuff interests me. So that was a couple of studio paintings. I have a few paintings in here by other artists, and really, we could just be watching hours of other artists. So I grew up in the city, and the museums were, I just thought that was normal. That's what you do. You go to museums. On the left this was in a catalog I found a few years ago at this great bookstore in Harrisburg. It's a Stuart Davis. I can't stop looking at it. I just love this painting. So when I was younger, or what maybe many of us know of Stuart Davis's work, is the lower one, the small one, hard-edged. He became very non-objective. There was some transitional work where he was doing these kind of buildings, and they were very, very, very graphic. But this is a plein air of his. I just love the mashup of the background coming forward, the way things come to the edge, the spaces in between the buildings. And of course, it's New England, and it's a little town I know in New England. This is a Hopper, Portland Museum of Art. We know Hopper's work maybe more for his illustrational work, the Nighthawks, the larger studio paintings. He started as an illustrator, more tight edges. This is so gestural. It's so juicy, but it's architecture also. And it's either Cape Elizabeth in Maine or Monhegan Island. And I love that background pushing forward and the little repetition of the chimneys and the houses clustered together. And then he's got this great gestural bush in the foreground. So I grew up with looking at a lot of these artists, but this was a surprise seeing this Hopper. This is a photo I took of this blue roof. You see a blue roof? Yeah. So this is up in Maine. I couldn't paint this. I either, as kind of in someone's property practically. So my brain does that a lot, not consciously, but sometimes, that's the best part of working with these forms and the landscape is sometimes the brain just totally loses the subject matter. And that's what I aim for, if that makes sense. This, I put this one example in. We're still looking at back to Pennsylvania, our paintings of architecture in Pennsylvania. And this area, this is just north of Mount Gretna in Annville, the town of Annville. And it was in an exhibit, and it was the card for the exhibit back in spring 2024 at Lancaster Galleries. And so many of you might know Lancaster had this incredible gallery that was 40 years old, and the last show was this past December 2024. So this was my last show with the gallery, and Joyce Heberlein was the director, and JD worked there, JD Whistler, for I think 30 years. And I'm sure he and Joyce, I think, influenced each other and created this incredible space for artists to come together. And nothing was compromised at that gallery. I mean, Joyce was so great. You know, there wasn't even a great emphasis on selling. You know, it was just not that kind of a gallery. So, and JD, he did restoration there. And, you know, he's a phenomenal painter, but he also did the most incredible installations. I mean, it was just like walking into a museum show. So I was really happy to have had a show with them this past year. So this painting was done a very long time ago. And I had it in a show with Joyce at Lancaster Galleries. I think the show was called Structure and something. It was a group show. And the show was over. I took the painting back. It hadn't sold then. And I, years later, reworked it. In fact, I reworked it several times, you know, down to the basement, back up from the basement. And I ended up reworking it to a point where I was really, really satisfied with it. And it was in this show anyway. So that's what Joyce was like. You could, you know, just, she didn't care how old your paintings were or if they had been reworked or whatever. But I, at this point, was starting to really have fun just inventing shadows. So, you know, this came back in the studio and I really, some of the shadows in the foreground became quite invented. And I do know that one of the last things I did was, there was a building in the distance that was reddish, but I really punched up that red stripe there. I don't use a lot of cadmium red in my palette, but I put that stripe there. This is another Pennsylvania painting, not far from Mount Gretna. The town is called Mastersonville, and it's right down the road south of here. Anville's north, Mastersonville south, and this is 40 by 30. And if my memory, which is, you know, not so great, I think I really kind of remember bringing this big canvas and leaning it and starting this painting outside at this spot. But it then became a studio painting, very reworked. The shadow became, you know, quite hysterical on the left, like quite invented. I don't mind working in the studio if there's a good problem to solve for a while, and then I'll go back outside again. And I'll show you an awful car later, or truck. I liked this car. So it was just sketched in. So it's 40, this is 40 by 30. This is Mastersonville also. And I don't have a ton of my sketches or drawings in here, but when I'm being good, I will do sketches first. These are tiny thumbnail sketches, like 2 inches square, all on the same page. Not for that painting you just looked at, but I'm turning my head and was looking in another direction. But you kind of get the sense of that building that I'm near. And I'm working out, I'm working out like what am I looking for? What's important? Why am I here? Like, why bother painting this? There's a million quadrillion landscape paintings in the world. What's important here? What's really catching my brain? And sometimes you can only figure that out through multiple drawings and just being in the space. And I'm working out, shadows and they were all done the same morning, I think. For a long time, I didn't really think about keeping or showing my sketches at all. I just don't worry about them when I do them to think about showing them or anything. So the next several slides are of the same location in Lidditz, and this was in the show in Harrisburg. This is a painting I really was happy with. Again, the experience, it really worked out. I'd gone to this location a number of times. So this one, even though it's small, 10 by 20, it's on linen. I did do an underpainting for this. I don't have the slide for it. So I usually use that burnt sienna. And, some days, and you'll see later, I have like this very small gestural work, but some days I'm just wanting to be calm and methodical, and that's where the different materials come in, so I had this linen canvas. And it's a yellow duplex. There's a factory to my left, and I'm in a parking lot. And it's spring, obviously. So the trees, there's this forsythia, the same yellow duplex. I went back here just over and over again. I mean, it's just great if you know where you're going and you know somewhat what to expect if you're in that kind of a frame of mind. So, it changed over the years, like shrubs would grow up. Sometimes the fence, I went back a couple of years later and the fence had fallen down. But the one on the left is much more compressed space. Everything's like pushed together in this shallow space with this fence in front. The one on the right is, I'm going to talk about paper. I started painting on paper, and I'll talk about that more. So that's 12 inches square and 12 by 16. And the one on the left is on a linen panel. So the panels I work on are all different. Some are like the ampersand panel, really slick, Richardson panel, and some are linen panel covered with linen. Okay, so here's the awful vehicle. So back in the studio, I had a studio in downtown Lidditz at the time, basically not a large space, but this was going by memory here. I think this was 52 by 72, and really was excited about it to start it because I had all these paintings of this yellow duplex. And but I'm in the studio, right? And I had a photo, and the photo had a truck in it. And I just couldn't, I made it this thing where I'm going to paint a truck, I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm going to figure out how to do the tires, and it's just so specific, so over described. So anyway, I got taken out, and yeah, and I really like the painting now. And what happened when I scraped the truck away, there was all this stuff underneath that was kind of part of the truck. Like you can't really see here, but I don't know where that ochre came from, but I think it was under the truck or something. And then was the bush there before? Maybe I added the bush. And then and I changed the sky, of course. So the thing was becoming much more, and here's where I wish I'd put another artist in, because I was thinking of some of the more graphic, hard-edged painters I like. I really like Stanley Spencer. I was also thinking of Jacob Lawrence, Ben Shahn, just sort of more hard-edged painting. And I'm in the studio, so things do tighten up. They just tighten up. So I took this boot. The painting needed something. It was 2016. The painting's called Boot, and the boot had something to do with the country at that time. And that's as far as I've ever gotten into still life, is that boot. Honest. I mean, back to the same location. So the one on the left is about 24 inches square, I think. Oh, it says 30 by 30. So it's not the first yellow duplexes I showed you. I'm turning my head a little bit, looking in this direction away from the yellow duplex. So, and that's the other thing that happens when you go back to the same spot, is this other, these other ideas are coming in. They're working on your brain while you're painting one day. You're going to come back and do that. And of course, my best times, because I go up to Canada, or spring and fall. So the leaves are not on the trees. And there's like an alley behind here. Shadows are really exaggerated. It got kind of edgy. I was surprised a hospital wanted this, and I kind of want it back, but I think it's a little edgy. But I'll talk about that later. So the one on the right, I had really been working on paper a lot at this point. Same location. This is the alley. This is the same tree. And what happened with the works on paper is, like a lot of my work, I just had a huge stack of plein air rejects. And I found that the work on, this is Arches oiled paper. I found that working on the paper just lent itself to layering and reworking rejects. Maybe because it's paper, what many artists have always said, sometimes working on paper, you're not as worried. But this paper just creates great textures. And so I started these reworked plein air, and they was starting to become more and more abstract. And some of them became totally non-objective. So here, the two trees, they became two trees. One tree became two trees, and they're kind of, my brain started to think of titles too, because normally I just was titling things where they were painted because it's too confusing. It's too much, you're doing the paintings and then you have to think of a title. So I would just paint, and it would be like Anvil or Mastersonville. So this became called Where Are We Going? And the two trees are like kind of walking together, trying to find a better environment to thrive in. So that kind of segues into this show I had with Jean Shaw at Cerulean Arts in Philly. Jean does these assemblages made out of wood and metal pieces. He's a master carpenter. He went to PAFA and was printmaker. So he's a master printmaker also. But he was constructing these incredibly beautiful wall reliefs. And I showed him my reworked works on paper mainly, and we thought a show would work out well together. I felt like I was reconstructing, former plein air paintings. These are very tiny. They're like 10 inches or smaller. And again, they started as landscapes. These, I believe, I actually cut the paper, which, I don't cut the paper until it's like, you don't want to cut something because once it's cut, it's cut. So, but I actually cut the paper. The one on the right was it last summer, that smog? This Canadian wildfires came through, and New York City had like an air quality rating up into the 300s. So the one on the right is called yellow smoke. I didn't even feel comfortable going outside and picking like greens from the garden. The one on the left is Little Black Cloud. And this one, again, oil on paper, very tiny. This is like 8 inches square. This was a landscape. This was almost a traditional long landscape on the left. So some of these became maybe a little dystopian. I put in the Indian miniature because that's an artwork that I've looked at most of my adult life. And I've started to realize that often in those miniatures, there's, a depiction of some architecture that's contained with nature around it. So I'm still going backwards. So that show was fall of 2024. In September, Matt and I went to Newfoundland. So Newfoundland is like twice again as far as going to Nova Scotia, where I've been going for a very long time. And I'd always wanted to go there, but it was just really far. And I was happy in Nova Scotia, but so we finally got to Newfoundland, and I haven't really processed it, honestly. I haven't gone back into any of the work. I've looked at the work, but this is the kind of thing you see on the left, and I had started doing some paintings that did not include architecture the summer before. So there were a lot of rock formations and the architecture. And we were staying at a friend of a friend's house. And the day we got there, I just set up that afternoon, not knowing, what was going to happen next. I just seized the moment and just painted. I just painted right from the deck of this house. So this is looking over at this piece of land that's attached. And I brought a slightly limited palette, not anything extreme, but this was a new place. And remember, I don't like to go to new places. So I packed a lot of panels and small pieces of paper, and I tried to work with a more limited palette. Same location. This is 14 by 18 on a linen panel. So the rocks were great, to not do the architecture and to try to use the rock formations as some kind of, structure. The one on the right was actually, you might have, maybe if you noticed, is the only painting in that exhibit of abstractions with Jean Shaw. It's a plein air painting, and I wanted to include it because I just wanted to see how it would sit with the ones that had been reworked. And the sky does this up there, and the rocks do this. Rockwell Kent, I've looked at his work probably my whole life. The Farnsworth Museum up in Maine and the Portland Museum of Art always had a lot of his work. I just love this bold, dark shape hugging the lower left and the background pushing forward. It's like that blue peak is either a peak or it's the sky behind the white clouds. It doesn't matter, but I like the fact that I don't know. And he's very graphic, and he's had done a lot of illustration also. This is still Newfoundland. This is a different town. One on the right is 14 by 18 on linen, and the other one is very small, 9 by 12 on panel. Most of the days were kind of gray and rainy, I think. I mean, there was a lot of sunny days, but that was good for me. I went to the, the edge and the fog and the rain, and just painted the water. So the summer before, I had consciously decided to paint looking out at the water. My entire time in Nova Scotia, I had never painted a water scene. And some stuff had happened that July, and I just needed a reset. And I just went to the same spot the whole couple of months painting there. So this is a setup. That's a piece of linen that I taped. The blue tape is annoying, but I've switched to white tape. These are on 22 by 30 inch sheets of paper, so they might be 30 inches across. And this is the oiled paper. And this was really different for me. And it was very, it was very freeing. This spot I was standing on had a lot of emotional stuff connected to it, having to do with people who were once there and all the changes, and my relationship to the water and being able to face the water again. And I was letting the white of the paper come through. I was just having a lot of fun. I love painting architecture and I love the hard edges, but this was a different kind of fun. And the edges, this printer gave me this term, the edges are live, they're not, I'm not playing with, how that's coming up against the edges. The other thing is the buildings are like little still life pieces, but here you could stand here and, I think as Rachel alluded to in her talk, you don't have to move. The low tide exposes rocks, the high tide buries them, the kelp comes up, the fog comes in. Fog is great in Nova Scotia. You don't have to move. It's not just the weather, it's the water coming in and out. But the other thing is, on the way to Nova Scotia that year, this was 2023, we took a route, forever widening route around Boston. We went up to Williamstown, Massachusetts, where the Clark Institute is there, if anyone's been there. And there was an Edvard Munch retrospective. I've never been in an exhibit that moved me so much. I can say that. It was massive. The work had never been seen in this country. And many of them were very, very large that he had taken outside. They're thinly painted. He had this big farm and he would just drag these enormous canvases outside. So this is a really big painting. Sorry, I'm not good with sizes. So that exhibit really was great to see before going to Canada that summer. These are just more from that summer. I started to, include a road or a building. This is tiny, like 6 by 12 inches. This is a slightly different town. The sky does that. That's what the sky does. I'm letting the white of the paper come through. This Arches paper. It's incredibly absorbent paper, and you can just keep building it up and building it up. This is another peninsula. All of these spots I have like a long connection to. So, and I won't go into that story, but that's a old boathouse there. So I just want to explain how I started doing plein air painting or landscape painting. And it's because it started in Canada. It started in Nova Scotia. And a lot had happened in my life. I had gotten a big fellowship. At the time, they were individual fellowships from the Massachusetts Artists Foundation. It was a pretty good lump of money that it was to go forward with. It wasn't based on anything that you had to do with it. And I went north. I went to Canada. And also at the same time, a group of us who were living in a studio loft building got evicted. And also I was getting ready to go back to school, to graduate school. So in graduate school, I was doing figurative work from photos. I got to Nova Scotia a few summers later, and the ones on the bottom, I have no record of really early work because they're slides, and so I just photographed like if something was reproduced in a newspaper or something. So they're black and white on the bottom, but the bottom ones were 9 feet across. So they're 48 by 36-inch panels. And the square one is 48 inches. So I was doing these large canvases in Canada, and I'm still not, I'm really not working from perception, landscape observation, except I was looking at my little building. So this thing of these buildings just kept creeping in. So the two at the top, when I started painting outside, perceptually, I started with the neighbors' yards, my yard. I'm still not looking at the water. I didn't look at the water till 2023. I mean, I looked at it, but I didn't paint it. And all these years, these two painters, again, have been, I feel like they've been with me my whole life as an artist. I mean, Fairfield Porter, again, even as a kid, he was up at the Farnsworth Museum a lot, exhibiting. I love his simplification. It's sweet, but it's just got such great composition. But his simplification of the tree, the shadow, and of course there's a building in there. You can see from the thumbtack, it's been on every studio wall. Lois Dodd, I feel like Lois Dodd has taught me everything about abstraction and edges. And I did take a workshop with her, but she's just my hero. And I just love the forms that she makes with the nature. They're not different than the way she's painting her buildings. So back to the very first paintings I did were of these little buildings. This is in Nova Scotia. This is the early 2000s, 16 by 16 inches and 6 by 12. The tiny one was done in a kayak. And I'm looking at the architecture from the water. I had a little box at my feet so I could put the wet painting in the box. And I was younger. And I'm looking at the architecture because these buildings were built and meant to be seen, and they were used from the water's perspective, from the water's edge. The villages were connected by water. People didn't drive. There were footpaths, but people connected to the next village by water. So some of these buildings are a couple of 100 years old, and they're all fishing related. So there is some water in there, and there's these great fog banks. So those are very early Nova Scotia paintings. And then friends over the years, I know so many great people up there who have much more, spacious property than I have. I'm in a teeny tiny house. So this friend lent her property, and this is a painting it's a Nova Scotia painting in this, what was a farming community. And that, if you notice, was a horizontal, and it made me realize, oh, maybe I should do more of this when I go back to Pennsylvania. So it kind of, painting this sort of long view in the distance, horizontal, it kind of gave me permission for some weird way to do that in Pennsylvania. So the top one is Schaeferstown, and the ridge is this blue mountain ridge. The bottom one is below Mount Gretna. So the ridge in the bottom one is actually Mount Gretna. So these buildings are pushed back. They're in the distance. These are 6 by 12. They're tiny. More Nova Scotia. I would go into town to paint, or in this case, someone else's property. That's a little 8 by 10 on the right. And that truck, I liked that truck. The truck was significant to a friend of mine. The town, because I hadn't been painting the water, scenes at all, the town is known for its architecture. It's a World Heritage Site, Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. So there's all sorts of stuff to paint in Lunenburg. And Louisa Matthias' daughter, like Lois Dodd, I just can't get enough of looking at her work. I love the edges, the shapes of the shadows, and that background pushing forward. And she does a lot of Icelandic paintings that do not include architecture. Okay, so now we're going to move on. I'm going to show some hospital work. Jay mentioned work in the hospital, but the segue here is the top images were done in Canada. It's a piece of paper I folded into thirds, a piece of toned paper, and they're gouache. And then I used the one on the left, which was done in my town in Nova Scotia. I used the one on the left as a reference for the painting that's in this hospital. And this friend, her sister, gave permission to put her picture in there. I always use perceptual or work based on observation for the large work. I can't work any other way now. So this is a small watercolor, and the larger one is 48 inches. And this is from Annville. Annville's just north of Mount Gretna. Another gouache, and that's 48 by 60. So when you're painting for, not all of these are commissions, but when they are commissions, you working not just, you need to respond to what other people want. Obviously, they're commissioning something. So there was a need for something very, very large. And this is my studio down below. The colors are in process. They're really, I start some of these giant ones with acrylic. So the color is pretty, a little garish punched up. It's not finished below, but I used a lot of the plein air smaller paintings I had to put this together. And I don't have great photos of the hospital work, so I made it black and white. This is another one. This is up in Annville again. This one's in the hospital. And this one, I had just been, I have all these plein air paintings again, and so I used it. This was probably the largest commission I did. This is for a different medical center. Penn State is different from Penn Medicine. So Penn State is connected to Hershey. So this is up in Enola on the Susquehanna River. And it had 4 parts. So they're 48-inch squares, and there were 4 of them. And again, I start them with acrylic. I meant to mention early on when I was first started doing plein air, I was using Liquin, and it made me really sick. I don't know if anyone's ever used Liquin. It's really toxic. So I got really sick, and then I have all these sensitivities now. So I can't push large masses of solvent around. So to start something this large, acrylics are really great. And the colors are better these days than they were in the 70s. I mean, acrylics are not bad. So I would lay these on the floor, and I got like, at this Amish hardware store, I got like a big horse brush. It's like this wide. And my friend Ruth Bernard years ago had given me a barbecue brush. But so it was great fun because I don't work this large normally. So, and there's a lot of problem solving involved. So I'd start these on the floor and just like pour paint around. So this is all in process, and that's the finished. Of course, they tighten up. I did add oil carefully. I mean, you can add oil to an acrylic painting. You just have to be careful. It has some absorbency or adhesion. I just want to say this commission was with an art advisory group based in San Francisco, but they were working with the hospital, and they were wonderful to work with. There was a lot of structure about what was expected, and there was a timeline of when you submitted what. And I kind of, we work alone as artists a lot. It was really nice to have sort of like a group think kind of thing. They didn't tell me what to do. Oh, but I had all these paintings that I used for this, and they were done in Maine. So the Susquehanna River, but I used paintings from Maine. I wanted to show, and there's only 2 slides left. I wanted to show a couple of paintings from Mount Gretna. Like Jay said, I lived here for 20 years. I had a studio upstairs, and the house had giant windows. So I just painted looking out the window. This is my neighbor's roof. And last one, going forward, I think I want to be more comfortable using my yard as an outdoor studio, as a place to like just really settle into painting in the yard. And we got a shed, which I love sheds, obvious reasons. It's got angles. It's a little building. It's like a little still life in the yard. The goat was not in the yard. The goat was from a reworked canvas. Someone else has goats in their yard. I think that's it. Oh, Heidi, hi.
You mentioned that you really wanted to go to Newfoundland,
Yeah.
and so I was curious about what you discovered.
I'm speechless about it. I mean, I wish I was 15, I'd move there. No, when I came back to Nova Scotia was flat. It literally much flatter. And Newfoundland is bold and rocky. And I'd heard of the art residency there like in the 90s when they first started. And because I'm kind of travel phobic, I never went. I actually don't do a lot of residencies. The hiking was great too. So walking and hiking is really important to me. And there's all this history on the trails of villages that had been there. A lot of the communities had gotten displaced. The government, when Newfoundland was absorbed by Canada, or they like to say they absorbed Canada, but when the Canadian government took over Newfoundland, they busted apart these communities on the water. So I didn't get to those because you can only get to those by boat now. But there's all these relics of foundations, and also it was the summer after, I had this experience down on those peninsulas looking out at the water. So I felt it was good to wait. It was good to go till then.
I have 2 questions. One is maybe easy. You talked about not having impact that colors. And now we curious about what is replacing what, but also curious about what your favorite colors are looking on a landscape scene.
Oh, that's a great question. What colors on my palette? And cadmium red. So I don't know why, but for a while I just didn't have cadmium. I do now, but I didn't have cadmium red on my palette. I had my favorite colors are cad orange and lemon yellow. And I basically have a warm and cool of each color. That's my palette is not exotic at all. I just have a warm and cool And I try to do as much mixing. Lately, I have for several years, Gamblin makes these grays now. They take all their leftover paint and they make a gray. And I'm finding those grays really useful. So that's changed things a little bit because I'm using the grays instead of, when I first started, I feel like I was using too much white to mix into all the colors to lighten them. So now I'm not doing that. And I'm using those grays and Naples yellow. But basically the palette is just, several yellows, several blues. But if there's any two exotic, what I call exotic colors is magenta. Maybe that was my replacement for, it isn't a replacement for cadmium red, but magenta. And I always have burnt sienna and turquoise, phthalo turquoise. Those are the two stranger colors. But when I went to Newfoundland, I actually put those aside.
What do you believe is strong intersection between arts and wellness? How does that influence?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The intersection between art and wellness. I think we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier. I think with such a consumeristic culture, I mean, it just drives me crazy. I mean, all we do is consume. And I was brought up by, anyway, much older parents who came out of the Depression. I mean, they had me older and we didn't buy anything. You used something until, nothing fell apart, actually. You fixed it. So this whole idea of consuming, and I feel like art, I think it takes from us consuming, and I think art nourishes us, or music, anything that's more constructive, where we're responding to nature or responding to, could be figurative or whatever. But I get a ton of, so, I mean, that's the doing of it. The doing of it obviously creates great wellness and pleasure. But then I started volunteering at the Hershey Medical Center when I was still at my teaching job, and was there from the beginning. They were trying to build up a better art on the walls because it was awful. And actually, the woman who started the program there, who I worked with, she lives in Mount Gretna now, Claire Dubois. And then all these hospitals got on board, and there's a national organization, and, they're getting much higher caliber art, and people appreciate it, but I don't know what I would do without creating. I think it would be unhealthy to not paint.
This question is from William. It says, interested in learning more on how to use the temperature of colors to transfer a 2D canvas into a 3D visual.
Temperature to create space and depth.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not doing atmospheric painting. That's an interesting question. I guess I don't think of, I think a lot of this push and pull of something from the background coming forward, popping forward. But I don't think of cool colors going. I think the tradition isn't it? The cool colors recede tradition and warm colors come forward. I don't think about that. I don't do that. Plus, some of the places I'm painting aren't like that anyway. I mean, you could be up in Canada and, the skies are becoming like yellow and orange lately. So I like this idea of the colors pushing forward into the space, and that tension this way. And the more obvious tension is this way and this way with the edges. So I don't know if that answers the question.
And well, I'm an artist too, and I walk around and I see things like this right now, and seeing the architecture that's here.
I think it's a question about description, the amount of description on a building that might have a a lot of interesting features of woodwork. And yeah, I'm drawn to looking at those. And some of the books I mentioned that I collected as a teenager were of, I mean, I've always been interested in all that, but not to paint it. So I think what catches my eye first is the shape of a shadow. And a lot of times, you know, when I'm kind of into a rhythm, it's sort of like a date to meet a shadow. Like I'll go, oh, I got to get there before 2:00, or I got to get there at 7:00. You know, I'm thinking of that and the space in between. And, but it's a challenge because our brain wants to describe things. And I'm trying to create a visual narrative of space, and space is created on the canvas, but it's also, I guess, created by light. Like the direction of a shadow is creating space and describing sort of a human space between buildings. So I think I've never done a lot of detail, and I've once got criticized for not putting windows in. But I mean, I thought it was a good comment. Not putting the windows in, you know, creates sort of a lonely look to the buildings, but it's just not what I'm interested in. I don't know. Does that answer it? No, not really.
Yeah, I think it does. It's just that there's so many interesting things that I'm drawn to that don't necessarily fit.
Yeah, well, I think I'm also interested in sort of a broader, this part of my life. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, I mean, I loved, and I still think if you look at his drawings, he's a great artist. But if you look at Andrew Wyeth and the detail and everything, but this later part of my, it sounds so old, but I'm, you know, I'm just into sort of a broader brush approach, and it's like a broader thought approach. You know, I think they're too detailed. You know, I think my work is too graphic, too detailed. I mean, that's a constant self-criticism.
But you initially sketch with charcoal or pencil when you're on site, and then you with underpainting.
No, great question. Question about what materials I'm using for sketching and whether I use a straight edge. I like wet media to sketch with, and I always have. I've never had good luck with graphite or charcoal. I mean, I had to use charcoal a lot teaching, but I love to use a watercolor brush to draw, or markers. They make these watercolor markers now that have a brush tip, you know, the Tombow, you know, there's a brush tip, and I like those. I don't do many graphite drawings or charcoal. And as far as the straight edge, yeah, I mean, I've tried over the years to realize that, you know, looking back at some of the earlier work, I do have a little pieces of cardboard straight edges, and I want to, and I've tried to vary that more over the years. When I look back, you know, there's a lot of hard edges, but I think with the architecture, depending on the composition, I'm always going to want, I do like what the space does with a straight edge. So yeah, I use yeah, not all the time, but you know, you get a nice edge without using something, you know, it's just another tool. So that's a decision, you know, what kind, do you want a soft edge? Then I don't use something. Yeah. And sometimes in paintings, I will use graphite, if it's very sort of a very atmospheric painting, I will go back and use graphite, especially with the ones on paper. I'll actually use graphite to define an edge on top of the oil paint.
How much reworking of planar pieces do you do in studio, or do you use them for your studio work?
What was the first part of that?
How much reworking of planar pieces do you do in the studio?
Oh, good, great question. I really don't like doing that much, so they go in a reject pile. There's different piles. So my favorite paintings, like again, it was the experience, and it was one session, it was done. I don't go back into it at all. I mean, I don't want to say how often or not often that happens, but I really don't like going back into plein air paintings. But there's different piles, and sometimes just exactly what something needs to fix it. And other times it just, you have to know when to just quit and either sand it down, or like with the ones on paper, I just started totally not trying to save the original motif. I don't like going back into plein air paintings, but a little bit. It's being in the studio. If you do it, I mean, I'd have to do it right away, like right away. So everything's still fresh in the brain.
So, they asked the one called
I don't know what she means by personification. Do you know what she means? The question is, the one that I think is kind of dystopian, of the two trees walking. I really felt the trees making a statement, and I did it in the title. And like many of us, very concerned about the environment. And so the painting just kind of evolved that way. So it wasn't like planning, to make that kind of a narrative. The boot, also, I just was drawn to this boot, and then I realized what was going on in the country, that there was a story there too.
Yes, what we want to capture, we will try again. What makes you go back to the studio?
Oh, to make a larger studio version. I'll just have a really strong urge to make something larger, and it'll be maybe a part of the year where I'm not going outside. It's very odd. I mean, I think definitely most of the paintings would not work larger. I mean, I've tried and they've failed. There's a lot of failures there. And that really hurts, like to work on something really large for years and years and just still not resolved. So I think the decision is just, it's a little, it's just a little quirky. I mean, it's on a painting by painting basis. It's not something I do a lot of, though. I mean, I generally don't ever have a lot of large work. And I haven't had like a lot of shows with large work. I just, in the past, yes, before I was, but now I don't like all those paintings. It's hard to go back once you start painting outside and painting in the landscape from perception. It's hard to go back into the studio. Yeah. But there's one word I wanted everyone to know about: deranged. The root of deranged is off the land. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou.